Welcome to this RTS panel discussion to discuss the hugely exciting return of the landmark generation-spanning documentary series Up, which has followed the lives of the same group of contributors every 7 years since they were 7 years old, making its eagerly awaited return to BBC One and BBC iPlayer starting Wednesday, the 29th of September, as a compelling two-part docuseries, 28 Up Millennium Generation, produced by Multi-Story Media. My name is Rhianna Dhillon, and joining us for a brilliant chat in a little bit is award-winning director Julian Farino and series producer Melanie Archer. So 28 Millennium Generation is the fourth in the series of films, which has been following a group of 7-year-olds from all over the UK since the year 2000, charting their lives every 7 years. So this time around, we meet our 28-year-olds in 2021.
In the year 2000, the beginning of a new millennium, the BBC embarked on an ambitious project. We travelled to every corner of the UK, from inner cities to remote Scottish islands, to find a group of 7-year-olds whose lives we would follow every 7 years.
Well, my favourite hideaway spot? I'll take you.
A unique and personal portrait of modern Britain. We filmed them again at 14 as they faced the challenges of adolescence.
What about girls though?
What about them?
And at 21 as they reached adulthood.
I come across very confident, but in my head it's not that at all.
Now we return as they all turn 28 in the year 2021.
Now, before we welcome our panellists, I'd like to introduce the BBC commissioning editor for 28 Up Millennium Generation, Emma Loach.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Rhianna, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm delighted to welcome you to this virtual Q&A panel hosted by the Royal Television Society to celebrate the 28 Up Millennial Generation. Over 2 decades ago now, Julian Farino and Melanie Archer set out on one of the most ambitious production achievements ever to be attempted, delving into the lives of a group of young individuals from a diverse spectrum of backgrounds from all over the nation. The goal was to provide a snapshot of what it meant to grow up in modern day Britain. The children were chosen from Cornwall, the Inner Hebrides, Liverpool, London, and across the nation. And 21 years later, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome the return of 28 Up, the Millennial Generation, to BBC One for its fourth instalment. Now 28 years of age, these fantastic people have been thrust into adult life and are facing the challenges of growing up and continuing their adult life in the middle of a global pandemic. Now, as a documentary commissioner, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I really do think the best television comes from telling the real life stories of seemingly ordinary people. And the Up series is a classic example of that. It continues to offer the most compelling insights into the lives of these extraordinary, inspiring individuals, showing us the extraordinary in the ordinary and the daring in the day-to-day. I'd like to thank the Royal Television Society, Julian and Melanie, Multi-Story Media, all our fantastic contributors and all the different teams who have made this series over the years. And I really am excited for you all to watch it. So thank you very much. And I'd now like to hand back to our host, Rhianna. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Emma, and a huge welcome then to director Julian Farino, series producer Melanie Archer, and 3 of our wonderful contributors, Gemma, Oliver, and Orala. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely our pleasure.
Waves around. I am so excited for this. This is something that I grew up watching, and it was truly a delight to be asked to host this. So Julian, let's start with you. How did you first get involved all those years ago, and why did you want to helm such a huge, exciting project like this?
Well, I don't think we knew exactly at the time what we'd taken on as a sort of lifetime journey, apart from in theory. But at the time, it was a project. It was when it was recommissioned, I threw my hat in the ring. I started in documentary, but I'd already moved into directing drama by then. But when I'd heard that the project was going to be rebooted, I approached immediately Bill Jones, who was the exec producer at the time, saying I really wanted to do it. My inspiration from the original Michael Apted series had been one of the main reasons that I'd wanted to work in this business. I thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen on television. And it was very much my sort of sensibility with, Mel and I always call it, the magic of the ordinary. Like, it wasn't sensationalist. It was, a chance to do something with real people. So I just went after the job fiercely, and it actually wasn't that difficult because, I was given it straight away. Mel actually started before me because she did some of the preliminary research, didn't you, Mel?
Yes, yeah, I did. So yeah, I was very lucky to be involved right from day one. I was, as a junior researcher working for Granada, I was lucky enough to be interviewed by Michael Apted for a researcher role on the original series when those contributors were turning 42. And if there's ever such a thing as a dream gig, it was that. I was learning from the best. They were shooting on film, and it happened to be 1999. And so we proposed to Michael that surely something this great and this important should start again for the new millennium to reflect the changing nature of Britain, but also with a view to continuing, which was, of course, a luxury that he didn't have when he started the original series. So I set off with another person. We divvied up the country into, effectively divvied up the UK in half. And I travelled around the UK as a kind of young researcher, AP at the time, with a camera and a car, and met over 2,000 7-year-olds from across the UK in brownie camps, in youth clubs, in schools, you name it, we tried it. And just took these little recordings on this little V8 sort of camcorder, and here we are 21 years later.
That's incredible. So to all you contributors, what would you say that you've got out of taking part in this sort of, part documentary, part social commentary? Orala, let's start with you.
What have I gotten out of it? I don't really know. It's a bit weird because I'll speak for myself. From my point of view, my perspective is a bit skewed. So for me, it's just every 7 years I catch up with Julian and Mel, and then I see what's going on in the lives of these other people that I'm somehow connected to, and that's it. And then I go back to my regular life, and especially because I don't ever meet 99.99% of the people that ever watch the show, so it doesn't actually feel like anything other than what I've been doing my whole life. So it's, I don't know. Actually, I would say I get to see very embarrassing clips of me when I was 7 years old. I have no recollection of those memories. So it is quite interesting and cringe-inducing to see myself at 7. So I have a kind of capsule of who I was, I guess.
Gemma, what about you?
I think for me, I'm kind of similar to Orala in the fact of it's just something I've always done. And I think it's very difficult to tell anybody around yourself with it, because it's not something that really comes into everyday conversation. Like, oh, do you know, I'm part of this amazing documentary that's on TV. It's it brings further questions and further. But I really see this show as sort of a gift, really. It's not very often you get to see your ordinary life filmed over every 7 years, and you can really see yourself grow and develop as a person. And I think what Mel and Julian are really good at are picking up on the things that we've said when we were 7 years old and how that's related to our lives now. I think that's just really amazing.
And Oliver, how does it make you sort of analyse or examine your life?
I would echo to some extent what Orala and Gemma have just said. I think, there's a lot of, it feels like switching it on and switching it off every 7 years. And in the meantime, you kind of forget about things. I guess in terms of what I get out of it, as Orala said, there's a lot of looking back at yourself. For me, actually, it's the more recent one that is always the most embarrassing, because I can sort of write off 7 or 14 as, I was only a kid, or I was only a teenager. But the one from immediately 7 years prior sort of feels a bit close to home, where you recognize yourself being a fool, but you still feel like you're partly that person. I guess it offers you, or kind of forces you almost to reflect upon your trajectory in a way that perhaps other people don't have so immediately accessible. I mean, I guess a truism is, to some extent, if you don't look at a previous incarnation of yourself and think, I haven't come very far, or who's that person or whatever, I almost want to be uncomfortable with looking back, because if you're not, then maybe you haven't grown as much as you could have in the intervening 7, 14, 21, however many years. So yeah, it's both cringy and I suppose reassuring, in that I like to think, at least looking back, well, I didn't know anything then, but now I've at least achieved a measure of enlightenment that hopefully is useful.
So Mel, even though this kind of first started in the early 60s, right? Why is this kind of programming still so relevant? Why do people still love watching these sorts of documentaries?
Well, I think in a way that it's become more relevant, because nothing that we see on, or very little that we see on television now, is simply and can genuinely be described as ordinary. Documentaries have changed, reality TV has changed the face of television, and documentary, as much as drama, is entertainment. And I'm not suggesting that our show isn't entertaining, I hope it is, and it is, but it is a celebration of, we don't try to change anything, we parachute into these guys, I mean, they've just said it, we parachute into their lives every 7 years. And in the intervening years, well, it's tough if we miss things. So if someone gets married in the meantime or has a child, we'd be so happy to have the cameras there, but if it's not at that moment, then we miss it. And that's really very rare. And I think the series is also a capsule, it's a time capsule, it's a snapshot of a moment in time. And as such, it always remains relevant, because it has something to say about the society that we live in. Although it's always intensely personal, it's not supposed to be a treatise on modern Britain, but it does offer a snapshot into what it is to be that age in the country that you live in at that time. And it so happens that most of our contributors still live in Britain. So therefore, you learn something about where you are and what society is, I think.
And Julian, do you think that this Millennium Up series has tried to rectify any oversights of the original one, in your opinion?
I don't think you can say it's tried to rectify. I think we had the advantage of knowing that we were going to go forward in time. You know, when Michael Apter started his series in '64, it was never conceived as a long-running series. That was somebody's brilliant idea afterwards to follow up at 14, having done it at 7, because it gave that sort of shone a light on what Britain was like. And it was originally conceived as a little mini film about class in Britain, and that's why they had a slight imbalance. We had the advantage of thinking, okay, we are representing, some sort of tapestry of modern Britain. So we were making sure that we were, geographically spread, that we had a cross section of all sorts of racial and class divide, whatever you would call it. So, it's enduring thing. It wasn't a case of, we became our own thing. We had a slightly different style from Michael's, and we became very close friends with Michael Apter through it. He was very not possessive, but he oversaw us at the beginning and wanted it to do the right thing. And he acknowledged that our films were different. We probably, his is a little more journalistic and ours is a little more, I would say, intimate. As we've got to know Orala, Oliver, Gemma, and everyone else over time, it becomes more personal. But I think as a viewing audience, just pick up on what Mel was saying, I think it has a sort of universal appeal, that series and this period, because everybody's grown up. To see yourself at an earlier age, to see people's evolution and what people go through. I mean, it celebrates that sort of, every life has its dramas, and certain people experience different crises or triumphs at different period of their lives. We can all, different people recognize different things, and it might be some people connect to Orala's version of faith in life. Other people connect to, their parents being separated, or others, so there's something for everyone, because we all have that sort of life experience. That's the beauty of it, to my mind.
That's interesting that you're talking about initially about the class system and how almost more prevalent that was in the first series. I mean, it is talked about very explicitly on the show. Do you think that the class system has become more or less relevant than previous series?
No, I don't actually. I think the opposite. I think we're less class-based. I think there's a sort of overlap of experience. If I think about all the people in our series, things like for the original, there's a kind of, we still live in that world of, post-war nuclear family and everything. If you look at our contributors in the first film of ours, you see a number of our characters who come from, what we used to call kind of split families, but for whom it's sort of, it completely works. And I think that sort of, there's a different sort of light on society that is a little more integrated, a little less rules. We live in a different age of awareness and social media and all those things. And I think it's not really about class. For me, the beauty is the tapestry. And, I think for our contributors, what's been beautiful as we've all grown up together in this sort of completely bizarre family that we all acknowledge that we've become, is that, it's somehow made great by the collective, the fact that it's such a tapestry, that the range of experience, for even from Gemma and Orala Oliver, who we have now, is so completely different. And yet there is a universal, like when I look at 28, Mel and I spoke about, you see the beauty of it is that, you can see everybody starting to become themselves in their sort of true version. And that probably is what that stage of life is. In the same way, when we made Seven, the film about 7-year-olds, we didn't know what we were going into, but it became a film about innocence, the beauty of innocence, because they're all full of ideas and humor and everything else, but that was the overriding quality. So we're discovering with them the ages of life, and there is a sort of connective tissue despite all the range of class and this, that, and the other.
Do you think that privilege is something that we reckon more with now than ever before, Orala?
Than ever before? I don't know if I can speak about ever before. Privilege, I think the conversation around privilege is much more prevalent, depending on what your privileges are, depending on what's going on in the world at the time of the conversation. So yeah, I guess, but I don't know, unfortunately, I don't know. Yes, we talk about privilege a lot, but I don't tend to, I guess, because I guess I have a lot of what is not considered privilege. So the conversations for privilege in my life are a bit different. But I would definitely say that it is being spoken about more, I guess, than previously. That was a rubbish answer, but yeah.
No, it wasn't. I think it's really interesting. And well, Gemma, with your sort of background in activism, what's your perspective on how our conversations around privilege are changing?
So I think people, like Orala was saying, are more open to the discussions around privilege, and they're more willing to listen to those types of discussions now, whereas I feel sort of way back it was just sort of, thinking when we were 7, it was more about sort of you keep those things to yourself and you don't really talk about them, and you keep them sort of very internalized. You keep them very much, it's your problem and you need to find your way to fit into society. Whereas now I feel like it's very much about sort of talking about what privileges other people have and how that can either put you at an advantage or a disadvantage, and people are more realizing that now than what they've done in the past, I would say.
Oliver, I think
sorry, Rhianna, I was about to say that, just to pick up on what they've said, is that you can hear from talking to Orala and Gemma that what's great about our relationship, and this is one of the benefits to a long-term relationship, is they will challenge us. So if we're not asking them what they want to talk about, they'll it's like, well, they'll tell us. Brilliant. but also they will challenge us to say, are you asking the right questions? Are we talking about the right things? Are you talking to everyone about this? And in the end, that's the universal. So the variety of life and background and opportunity, it changes massively across all our contributors, but the universalities that they're experiencing, some of the things that they're experiencing are across the board, and they will pick us up on it if we're not.
Good. That seems really important. Oliver, you, I think, were the only one in the show who told us who you voted for, and politics by its very nature is divisive. So why did you want to make sure that audiences knew which way you lean politically from the off?
I mean, I think I would be lying if I said that wasn't to some extent a comment on privilege and class that we were just touching on. I would have to be entirely lacking in any kind of self-awareness not to recognize that, not to speak for anyone else, but I'm aware that I have had hitherto, a very privileged life in many respects. And I think when you are privileged enough to have those series of experiences or opportunities or whatever, then I think being transparent about it is all that you can do, is something that you owe people, and also trying to, without wishing to sound entirely self-indulgent, try and give back to some extent, to the extent that it's possible to. And I think, and also show that it's possible to have some kind of social consciousness and kind of an awareness of social justice issues, even if you don't necessarily come from a background whereby that was pushed on you, or whereby you were really forced to have those perspectives because of prejudice or bigotry or whatever else that you were unfortunate enough to face. I guess I would also draw a bit of a thread with the previous discussion we were having about, how do you think the show, what do you get from it, and what does it give, and all that stuff. I guess in the same kind of trite way that I mentioned, it's embarrassing to look back at yourself and how you hope to have grown. I guess on a more macro level, and I wouldn't pretend necessarily to have watched all of the original series episodes, but I've certainly watched some of them. And in the same way that I hope on an individual level, or at least I certainly feel like you look back and you see yourself and how you've grown in the intervening period, I guess, you can look at the whole series or the whole collection of 2 series as we are now, and look at it in some way and I think this is probably the intention, right? As a commentary on British life and the UK generally, and say we were at this point in the mid 60s, and we're now at this point in the 2020s, and hopefully, in most instances, if not quite all, perhaps the trajectory is positive, albeit clearly one that there's a long way to go in a lot of different areas.
Julian, part of documentary filmmaking is not to interfere with the lives of the people taking part, more to observe. But with an ongoing program like this, how do you feel about the documentary informing the direction of some contributors' lives?
I think you can only think about it as like a giant responsibility. We're aware, and part of the reason it's such an emotional sort of journey for us, for Melanie and I, is, we are, asking people to talk quite, intimately and personally about their own lives. And some part of you has to make a judgment of how that might be perceived. We don't want to create headlines or whatever, make it difficult. I can only call it, a sort of deep responsibility. And at the same time, you have to try and achieve honesty. You're not trying to, put rose-tinted spectacles on people's lives. You have to try and deal in, real and sometimes difficult issues. I think, and Orala, Gemma and Oliver spoke to this, the beauty for me of the project is that it's not meant to be intrusive. We're not documenting every moment of their lives. That idea that it's a snapshot means that it can go away and come back every 7 years and not be sort of running people's lives. But if it might affect them, then that is our sort of duty to be aware of that. So the strangest thing is like how close we all are, given that we only see each other every 7 years. And we all talk a lot about this. When we had the screening all together for everybody of the 28, we all came up afterwards and going like, we are the craziest bunch of sort of connected people, given that we don't see each other. It is a somehow profound experience. And when we started, Michael Apted said to Melanie and I, this will become much more significant in your lives and important to you than you can currently realize. And it's only now, because we've been doing it for 21 years and we have this, lifelong relationship. We've known everybody in the film for most of their lives, that now we're starting to understand how right Michael was. It's incredibly important. And part of that sort of our responsibility towards the people in it, that's why it's so important. We have to sort of be fair and do right by people.
Actually, what was lovely, Gemma, was seeing, because you were actually being interviewed next to, is it Ryan, I believe, that you were kind of interviewed when you were 7 years old.
Yeah.
So how is that? That must be quite lovely to be able to reconnect with someone who you actually knew, like, time after time.
Yeah, so me and Brian tend to have sort of similar kind of circles anyway. We're both disabled people living in Bolton, so we're both connected to very similar sort of services or organisations or community groups or something like that. So we do tend to have a bit more of a connection anyway, but being on this show sort of makes that connection a little bit stronger. And although, you know, when we were 7 we was dating, we've much moved on from that now, but I'd like to think, you know, that we're still quite good friends who can support each other if you know, either one of us is feeling either particularly sort of oppressed against or sort of discriminated against. And I think that's what's nice about this sort of meeting kind of thing.
It is lovely. Tell me about that screening then, when you all got together and, you know, you all reunited and watched it together. What was that like? Do you kind of get really excited to see where everybody else is at that time of life? Do you compare yourselves with each other?
No,
I would say I would never compare myself, but it's so exciting to see how everyone's doing. And you end up asking yourself, I remember watching it and being like, why am I all of a sudden very emotional? Like, why am I emotional about this? And you realize that you do have this weird, profound connection with these random group of people that I would never have met, you know, outside of this, and you're rooting for them and you're hoping that they're doing well, and you're hoping to see, you know, that life is treating them kindly. And then we get together, and then, you know, when you see yourself on screen, you're like, oh no, can't watch this, but everyone else is like, oh, that was so wonderful, that was so, you know, whatever. And then afterwards I was just filled with this like warm sensation of like, I don't know why, but that was just really beautiful to experience. And also I'm shocked by how similar we all are. Like, we all seem to be going through or have gone through or realized the exact same thing. And that, I think, I wasn't expecting. Oh, is that a spoiler? Am I allowed to say that?
You are.
You are. Okay, just making sure.
Well, are you allowed to go a bit further into what you mean?
I don't think so. Melanie's nodding. Julian's face is straight.
You say anything.
Yeah,
Okay.
talk about what you want.
So basically it's like at 7 we were all, you know, I guess in our own worlds.
Hilarious.
You know. 14 we were in school. 21 things were a bit, you know, more progressed, but there was still some type of structure that we were experiencing, right, that was influencing our lives. 28 were pretty much removed from school, were removed from the sort of compulsory aspects of growing up, and you're sort of your own person now. And so it was really surprising to see everyone have the same type of self-realizations, or, you know, come to the same conclusions about what's important for them in life, and, you know, their approach on life. I was really shocked that we're all so different. We come from so many different backgrounds, have had different, you know, experiences growing up, and was the same type of messaging is being spoken about. And I found that really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that shows our connection as a group, you know, that we've all sort of gone through this all together at the same time, but in very different ways.
Yeah.
And bringing us all together for sort of like a group screening helps us realize that. And I feel like that's why it's so sort of emotional. And like, after we watched it, I came back and I was like, oh, I just had a little cry, everybody. Like, just after watching it. But it is more like Orala said, it's not about yourself, you know, what yourself has said and things like that. It's more seeing everybody else come to that same conclusion and that same sort of understanding of themselves. It just felt so nice to see everybody in that position now. I'm feeling happy with what they've achieved throughout their life. It just felt really nice.
I thought one of the most thought-provoking lines came from Talon, I think in episode 2, and he says he spent too much time trying to understand himself instead of trying to accept himself. Do you think that idea of, you know, finding yourselves is possible just through getting older, Oliver?
I think so, to be honest. I mean, I'm sure, I don't want to speak for anyone else or suggest that everyone's journey is identical, but yeah, I think everyone has their own calendar, right? And it's not necessarily something that's predetermined. There can be different factors influencing it, and it's not the same for anyone. But I also think it would be completely reasonable to suggest that you know, you become, as Julian was saying earlier, especially in your later 20s and looking forward to the next, you know, however many installments, I guess you would hope that everyone brings to those experiences, you know, their own life experiences, their own, you know, growing up, right? Like that's fundamentally, I guess, what the series is about tracking people growing up. And it would be weird if you didn't see that during the course of 20 odd years at this point, and, you know, however many more years into the future. I also, just in the interest of full disclosure, I unfortunately wasn't able to make the group screening this time. And in fact, I've been consistently rubbish with having other stuff scheduled. So I've done, like, I think when we were 7 years old, we got together and watched fireworks and saw it. And since then, I haven't actually made it to any of the group screenings. No. But I guess it really hit home when Orala said, you know, she watched it and then kind of got that warm fuzzy feeling or felt a bit emotional or whatever. And I would say maybe in the past I hadn't necessarily felt that as much, and yet this time around really did in a way that I wasn't expecting. And whether that was from kind of seeing, as people have already touched on, kind of people becoming a kind of more distinct version of themselves, or more grown up, or more recognizable, more adult, and more in tune with their emotions and their experiences or whatever, and also an ability to articulate them that maybe none of us had when we were 7 or 14 or 21 or whatever. And also just, I mean, I think there's a slightly different flavor, film 1 and film 2, but I think I came out of watching both of them thinking, just feeling hopeful, honestly, and looking at what other people have been up to and achieved, and the kind of things they're talking about, and thinking, not only do I, you know, I don't know these people particularly well, other than this weird journey that we do every 7 years, but you do feel a sense of pride and a sense of, I don't know, I mean, maybe this is a cheap line, but I feel like there's, you know, if depending on your political persuasion or whatever else, there are maybe not so many things to feel patriotic about in the UK at the moment. And I felt like having the Olympics and then having this, I was like, that's two in the positive check column, which was quite refreshing.
I would say, if I may, to pick up on that, Ollie, that, you know, in terms of it being emotional, as well as the sort of, you know, the bonding of the family that we all are, when we made the film, and this was a tough film to make because of COVID and everybody's locked in, and weren't able to film their lives as expansively as they would have been in a non-COVID time. Out of the film, you find there's a sort of hope and an optimism. Like, even when people aren't necessarily successful, it's not like you know, it's just the honesty of the endeavor and people reaching for something good. And that was a kind of almost across the board. There were, you know, there's lots of examples, you know, of people trying to do good in life, either in a very, you know, very overt way, like Gemma and her activism, or in a very personal way, you know, Talon trying to understand himself or whatever it might be. We found that the film, you know, film had an incredible sort of positivity, which in this sort of rather difficult times that we're living in was really reassuring. And I found that when I watched it back, and I hadn't seen it for a few weeks and I wasn't expecting to be emotional, I found that incredibly emotional as well.
I'm really glad you picked up on that, actually. I wanted to ask you about this, because I think when you talk to people perhaps of a slightly older generation who grew up with the original series, and they kind of talk about how devastating and tragic some of the stories were from some of the contributors. And I just thought, watching this series, just how joyful it was and how glorious. And as you say, it was people trying to do good. There's so much cynicism in the world at the moment. Oliver, you were just kind of picking up on that. And so were you kind of expecting, Melanie, to kind of have so much joy come out through the lives of the contributors in a time where we really, really need it?
Well, I suppose the short answer is no. Yes, because I know the contributors, and so I always knew that there would be laughter and warmth and all those things. I think the strength of their relationships with friends and family really grown to understand, because that's the one thing. Obviously, initially we had a relationship really with their families first and foremost, but we've grown to know their families and friends and their personalities. So I wasn't surprised about the joy, but life is actually really tough, and a lot of people, and in our contributors included, have to really fight either against issues with mental health or with poverty, jobs, discrimination, whatever that might be, or even, you know, trying to work out their own version of happiness. So I think what I was worried about in COVID was that we would find a group of people who were genuinely trodden down by how tough it is to be young. You know, people are always talking about the cost of housing. None of that is untrue. These guys are facing that.
Yeah.
But the complete triumph of their personalities, their relationships, their values, and their kind of outlook is what shines through. And I guess that should have never been in doubt for me, because I know them really well. But just the situation in the world and in Britain made me wonder what on earth we were going to find, and kind of worried about what we were going to find, because I kind of imagined that we'd just find a load of people in their front rooms with their heads in their hands. Whereas everyone was like, yeah, this is tough, but actually it's all about X, Y, and Z. It's all about next year. I've put my plans on hold, but don't worry, I'm going to get there. And COVID, in fact, was an impetus for a lot of our contributors to really genuinely make changes for the better. So I think being allowed to tell those stories and come out with something very, very hopeful at the end of it is something that Julian and I are incredibly proud of. And I should say on that note that the screening night was the most nervous I've probably been for 7 years since the last one. Because and Julian will attest to that, I was in the phone in a right old state beforehand, just because I do feel that the responsibility of representing these contributors who have now become our friends and our strange extended family it is huge. And you absolutely don't want to get that wrong.
What other challenges came out through having to film? You know, it's like the only program that you really couldn't cancel or postpone because you have to do it every 7 years. So yeah, what other kind of challenges came out through filming through COVID?
I mean, it was a huge practical challenge. It was when we were on the road, we decided, we waited twice, and we were in touch with everybody saying, we're waiting, we're just in case, you know, because at that time it was like things might open up and summertime and what have you. And then, you know, in September, we're like, well, let's go and do it come what may. And it felt like everywhere we were going, we were being chased by COVID. It was like having a dragon snapping at our heels. We would be on our way even to Scotland. We started in Mull with Ben, thinking at least that'll be COVID proof, tiny island, all outdoors. And we were on our way up there, and then literally we were driving up to Oban and from Glasgow in the rain, and we heard that Nicola Sturgeon on the radio had rewritten the rules that day, and there was a shutdown about travel. So all our plans, what we were planning to film with Ben, were out, and we really had a sort of moment between us, looking at each other like, yes, let's do it. No obstacles, going to be too great. And that was the way that we proceeded with the film, that it was going to be a kind of come what may. But, you know, Oliver, for example, had, you know, won a bursary to go and do some research in Brazil, which we quite fancied shooting. And John in the film was about to do his lifelong plan to move to Australia. And Mel and I fancied that one as well. And, you know, all of those things that, you know, Oliver does jiu-jitsu, and, you know, there were like great sequences to film. None of those were there. So how, you know, whether the film would feel, you know, expansive enough, that was our worry. The rest was just practical, and we did it, and people were fantastic. Gemma, you know, had to be, you know, very, very careful about COVID, and you barely met anyone. When we first went to talk to Gemma, it was all in the garden. We didn't film inside Gemma's house, we filmed outside, and you know, everybody just sort of had to sort of go with it. But what we did find, and we, you know, was as a result, you know, it was a compensatory thing. It became a sort of slightly more intimate interior kind of thing, because we had to delve deep and try and do things. We didn't have the luxury of being able to film carnivals and football matches and, you know, lots of things that we did. We actually got quite a lot done, but those were the challenges for us going in. I
mean, you got to go to China.
Well, actually, we filmed that remotely.
Really?
We had to set up with a Chinese crew. I mean, the main thing was to our interviews and chats with Stacey. We had a live link, so we were actually chatting to her for real, and we made sure we spoke to her a lot before, so that we had built the relationship. Because, you know, our thing is always we go around to try and see everybody first, and even that was limited to Zoom conversations often. Because you have to get to know someone again, even though we know each other, just to find out what's going on. And that was our biggest, you know, but we did chat to Stacey, but the actual filming was done remotely with us on a link, sort of watching, but you can't quite control in the same way. And often
that was super tough. That was really tough, because really our films are nothing without the relationships. That's what they are.
Yeah.
And so to ask Stacey to have somebody that she'd never met knock on her door in China and start asking her questions about her life, her relationships, her triumphs, her worries. And she was very, very emotional anyway, because she was coming towards the end of that journey. And, and so it was a time of very heightened emotion for her anyway. And we were so aware. We were sat in our own front rooms in the middle of the night, directing people that we'd never met with somebody that we hadn't seen for 7 years. And in fact, she hadn't seen Julian for 14 years because I went to China 7 years ago.
Oh, wow. Right.
To film with her. So the whole thing was very heightened emotionally. And Julian and I felt really, really sorry for Stacey, because it's a lot to ask, but she did brilliantly. She did absolutely brilliantly. She launched herself in, dealt with it all. I guess we were more worried than she was, maybe. I don't know.
And then did you manage to have a reunion with Stacey when she came back to the UK?
Spoiler.
Not allowed to talk about that. We'll say no more.
I did.
Good. Gemma, it's not often that we see wheelchair users or other impairments represented on our screens. So is there a hope that 28 Up will encourage more physical diversity on TV?
I mean, I see sort of now with obviously the Paralympic Games and things like that going on as well, we see sort of more diversity on TV, things like The Last Leg, those kind of things like that. But what I'd really hope with this documentary series is that we see more diversity on the screen, where you don't have to be this like super crip, where you have to be a Paralympian, or you have to be an actor, or you have to be developed in a certain way to be on television. I hope it sort of shines light on the fact that you can be an ordinary disabled person, and things can be very sort of entertaining and worthwhile filming for those people as well, because we have just as interesting as a life as the rest of everybody else.
And I mean, I asked you, all at the top about, what you get out of taking part in the series. What do you hope that people watching will get out of it?
So I hope that people sort of see my journey and see how long sort of the journey has took me, well, all of us, to be honest, all of the contributors sort of see how long this journey has taken us in order to feel happy with ourselves and really sort of understand our own morals, wants, values, needs. And hopefully somebody could see that and realize that a little bit earlier, because it's such a nice place to be when you don't really care what the rest of society think about you anymore, and you're just happy doing things as long as it fits within your own sort of ethos, principles, morals, and really you're not bothered what anybody else thinks about you other than that. And I'd really love a young person to see that and really sort of accept that, and hopefully make that journey a lot earlier than any of us did.
Gemma, you're actually making me feel ancient. Starting talking about young people.
Oh, I know. It feels weird talking about young people when I still feel like a young person, but then I work with young people now, and it's weird. Like 15 to 20-year-olds, and it's like, it does feel strange. They are the new generation, and that's what's weird to feel like. We were the new generation, but they're the new generation now.
Orala, is that something that you can relate to as well?
Yeah, definitely. I would say pretty much exactly what Gemma said. This idea that for me, happiness is really being as true to myself as possible. And I'm really confronted with that actually when we make this show, because I can remember like a million times in filming when I'm talking to Mel and I'm like, guys, this is so boring. Like my life is so, people are going to watch this and be like, she is so boring, but it's just the reality of my life. Like there was this time in filming that didn't make the cut, where I was talking about mackerel. I was talking about a mackerel supplier and my fermented vegetables. Like there was this grand reveal of jars of carrots and beetroots fermenting. And I was like, people are going to think I'm crazy, but this is who I am. And I can only be that. And everyone on the show is really just being who they are, not trying to put up a pretense, you know, not trying to impress anybody. And really, you know, Julian and Mel kind of create that environment where we feel comfortable to kind of reveal who we are and stuff like that. But that's that joy that people have spoken about, that warmth is, for me, really comes from realizing who you are, realizing what's important to you, realizing what makes you happy, and just existing in that space. And so, just like Gemma said, I hope that people can watch it and feel like, oh, like, you know, maybe I feel like I've been too concerned about, you know, what other people think of me, or maybe I've been internalizing a lot of, you know, other people's expectations, and, you know, I feel a bit like I haven't lived life the way that I would want to, and I'm seeing all of these people being who they are, and it looks like they're happy. Like, maybe I should make steps towards that, you know. I hope that can happen. Absolutely.
And Oliver, does it sort of make you think and reflect about what you might be saying in 7 years' time when you're 35? Do you sort of does it sort of give you an idea of getting goals in place, or is that not really what this show is about at all?
You said the number 35 and I just died. If I'm being completely honest, not so much. I'm not necessarily projecting ahead 7 years and thinking, oh, I hope I'm sitting here or saying this or looking like that or whatever. I mean, what more is there to say on top of what Gemma and Orala said so eloquently? I mean, I completely agree with both of them. In you know, the real progress, I think, looking at everyone else and thinking about myself as a sense of self-awareness and being more, you know, every time you're a little bit more comfortable with who you are. And that's certainly something that I feel. And in that sense, then looking forward, I suppose I feel more of that more consistently, you know, at 35 or at 42, or even when the numbers get even bigger and scarier.
Let's just stick with 35 for now.
Yeah, right. Let's see if they get funding for that. They might not even get funding for that, so it might be right. No, I'm joking. I mean, I guess the other thing that I would pick up on briefly is just to say, again, that the main relationship, at least for me, and I suspect I speak for all of us, the main relationship that I have out of this is really with Mel and Julian and, you know, the rest of the production team. And it's been really nice that it's been kind of a core group who've all stayed the same people throughout the 20 odd years we've been doing it. And I think, you know, I would completely echo what the other contributors have said in saying, you know, I guess they would say we're the magic, but I guess I think of them as the magic in terms of not just how they put it together logistically, but in terms of developing the relationship where, you know, we don't see each other maybe we see each other once or twice in the intervening 7 years, you know, for a coffee or whatever, just for a quick catch up, but it's not a significant body of time. And yet whenever I see either one of them or both of them, I always feel like I'm at home and I'm with people who I know and who, you know, I trust, and they, for whatever reason, seem to trust me. And we have that sense of warmth, and you know, I hope and expect that that's going to continue and heighten even more. And for me, that's kind of at least one of the key takeaways, I guess, that I, going back to your first question, what do you get out of it? I guess like what I get out of it is a nice relationship with the group of people and you know, the production people especially, which I didn't anticipate, but which feels really really life affirming and nice.
And it goes both ways. So that's a nice love-in. But yeah, it's true. I one of the things that I thought, but maybe with the COVID thing and this time round, was that when I worked on the original series, one of the first things I remember one of the contributors saying to me was that every time it came around, every 7 years, she thought to herself in the 3 or 4 weeks in the lead up to the interview, she'd think, I need to do a skydive, or I need to do something so that I've got something to talk about. Because 7 years goes by and it kind of, you know, all these sort of life kind of happens, and she'd think, I need to do a skydive and have to have something to talk about. And this time around, I thought with COVID, it was quite a leveler, you know, everybody was kind of slightly in the same boat. And but I hope that these guys don't feel that when we turn up, that they've got to suddenly conjure up something to talk about because it's just about them. And you know, so that's what I hope.
I would say the only thing I feel is that I need to tidy up my house. There's this massive rush to tidy up. Like that's the only thing. My house has to look clean because normally it isn't.
Agreed.
Yeah, same. We were talking about sort of, you know, patterns and trying to anticipate what people might talk about, whatever. I mean, Owen was the only one to have had children. Was that a surprise to you, Julian and Melanie? And how do you think that what does that reflect about society?
Well, it tells you something about how, this demographic has changed in terms of previous generations, because probably in Michael's series and 40 years ago, most, a large proportion of such a cross section would have been married and expected to have children. Mm-hmm. And that's just an indication when we talk about it's a portrait of modern Britain. There you go. People are having settling down later. The financial things of getting your own house, and all of those are becoming more stressful or difficult. So that's just how inadvertently it throws a sort of mirror to society. I mean, the only one, the one that was most surprised was Owen, because when I said to him, I don't think I even told him till after we were having a drink after the filming. I said, by the way, do you know you're the only one that's married? And he was like shocked and worried that he was going to be somehow, the freak of the show because he was the one with kids. He had no idea that nobody else actually in the film had become a parent.
I have to say that was almost a great relief, in a world where there are so many pressures, that actually seeing a generation who were putting other things first and foremost was really lovely to see, actually. And we haven't really kind of touched on your kind of families and how, as you Melanie, you were sort of saying how you're so involved now with families as well as contributors. So for you all, how are your families kind of, do they still get as excited as they did initially when you were 7 years old? Do they still feel as involved? Aurela's nodding. Yeah.
Yes, they are probably more excited than me. Yeah, because I mean, for them, they have no skin in the game anymore. Before they would be, much more on screen and everything. Now they just get to enjoy it. They don't have to worry about what they look like, if their voice sounds weird or whatever. They just get to enjoy it like a spectator. So they're living it up at the moment.
Gemma, what about you? What do your family get out of seeing you talking about your life?
So yeah, I think the same sort of, my family are so excited about it. Like as soon as we had an inkling of when it was coming on television, I had sort of texted my family and they were all like, oh my God, I'm so excited. And then they've also sort of shared it all over their Facebook, and then my extended family, so Charlie's family are all sort of sharing it, like, oh, isn't this amazing, like she's such a brilliant young person, and this and the other. I think sort of the difference is this time around I was maybe going to try and arrange something with my mum, but my mum has said that really it is all about me now. I'm an adult, and although we very much have a relationship with my mum, it's very much sort of about me and my life and my life with Charlie now, which is the complete opposite to obviously when we were 7 and 14 and even 21. My mum was still around at 21, had just come out of university and just needed a lot more sort of support at home. So my mum was a lot more around then, whereas now it is very much about how I've settled and how I'm sort of living independently. But like Orala said, that just means that they've got out of it. Like they don't have to think about what they look like on camera or how they speak or anything like that. So that's why they're really excited about it.
And Oliver, has your dad ever forgiven you for saying that his job was boring on TV?
He definitely hasn't forgotten about it, that's for sure. I'm trying to think, actually. I'm not sure that my parents, I think they got away very lightly, because I'm not sure they actually have ever made an appearance. Yeah, I mean, they're excited. I think maybe my situation is also slightly different in that my family consists of my parents and me. There's no cousins or aunties or grandparents or siblings or whatever. So no one to go too crazy and hype me up too much, which is maybe a good thing. Yeah, I mean, I think I'll probably go round to theirs for dinner and watch it together, and try and like cover my face when it's my bit, and then enjoy everyone else's bit. And yeah, I don't know. I think the other only takeaway is I tried to swear less this time than I did at 21, because that was the main thing I got grief from my dad for, was not watching my tongue as much as maybe I ought to have done.
Which is exactly the same with John. His mum was furious with him at 21
Well, I enjoyed the candid moment where he was like, oh, I promise not to do that.
There is so much to love in this new series. So thank you so much for being with us to discuss the amazing Millennium generation of Up. You can see the documentary on BBC One tonight and again next week on the 6th of October, with both episodes available on BBC iPlayer. I'm Rhianna Dhillon. This has been an RTS panel discussion. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to our wonderful, wonderful panel, to Julian, Melanie, Orala, Gemma and Oliver. Thank you.